Florida and New Hampshire pushed to remove Trump from 2024 ballot. This is pretty terrifying. Here's a clip.
Oh, it's getting worse. From Politico.
Sure is.
New Hampshire Republicans feud over bid to knock Trump off 2024 ballot. The state GOP chair defended Trump's eligibility on Monday. We also have this from Friday. Florida lawyer files challenge to disqualify Trump from 2024 race, citing 14th Amendment. Now, that one hit Friday. We know it has begun. They're going to try and file all these legal challenges, say Trump can't be president. But this is new from Politico. Take a look at this. New Hampshire Republicans have erupted in a feud over a long shot effort to keep former President Donald Trump off the ballot in 2024, with the chair of the state GOP insisting Monday that the front runner for the party's nomination will be included. In New Hampshire and elsewhere, some legal scholars and Trump critics have long argued the former president should be disqualified from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars those who've taken an oath to support the Constitution from holding office again if they've, quote, engaged in insurrection against the United States or given aid or comfort.
They knew this was a law. They must have. They planned all this out. They knew people were going to go like protest on January 6th. They knew look at this law, right? You could just tell, look at this law. It's insane. They knew this law was a thing. We can bar. This was all planned. Like, especially this story with these people saying this, they planned it. They knew January 6th there's going to be protests there. So they planned it all out. And they're like, hey, we're going to say this is an insurrection no matter what. It makes sense why the Capitol Police, even the Capitol Police chief at the time, thought it was like a setup. So they set it all up. They're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to let people in, call it an insurrection, because look at the law. It says you can't hold president again in the future if you participated in an insurrection. So like, okay, January 6th, they're going to be here at the Capitol. Let's go and let them in. We're going to call it an insurrection. And then guess what? Donald Trump, we can have an excuse to remove him from the ballot. These people are so scared. It's outrageous. They are so scared about this. They're like, okay, he can never win again. That's insane. They're just so scared of him. So they're like, oh, let's try to get him off the ballot. I don't know if it's going to work. I hope not. Just let's have a fair election. You think the country's divided already? They don't care if it gets divided more, apparently, because they're just going to divide it even more and more and more. If you remove Trump from the ballot, oh man, Trump supporters, there's 70 million of them. 70 million Trump supporters. That's how many votes he got in 2020. And now I think his supports even went up since his indictments. His supports went up tremendously. I covered it yesterday. He went from 8% of the black vote in 2020 in polls to 20% now. And that's insane. And if you look at polls, for whatever reason, it seems like just people on the left like to participate in surveys more. So, yeah. So they participated in surveys, and then the people on the right, they're not even like participating in them. So it's probably under like estimated how many views he actually has, or how many voters he's going to have. He's going to have like all these voters that aren't even getting counted in the polls, and he's already so up in the polls. So yeah, really interesting like how this is going to continue if they really try to get him off the ballot. Let's return to the clip though. Let's see what they have to say.
To its enemies. But the dispute is taking off in New Hampshire, where Bryant Corky Messner, an attorney who ran on Trump's endorsement and Senate nominee, blah, 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 is questioning Trump's eligibility for the ballot.
What?
I'm a constitutional conservative. The words.
He ran for Trump. He like ran with his endorsement. Now he doesn't want him on there.
Say what they say. I quite frankly believe it is in Donald Trump's best interest to get this looked at as quickly as possible. In any effort to keep Trump off the ballot will face a steep climb. Blah, blah, blah. We get it. But here we go, ladies and gentlemen. State by state, it's not even 2024, and they're already trying to remove his name from the ballot. If even a single state removes Trump's name from the ballot, you will have 75 million people at the bare minimum saying, we never had an election.
Mm-hmm.
This is crazy.
I would say that. I'm sure you would say that.
Yeah, I would too.
Absolutely. I mean, the 75 million people who voted for him last time around, I can't imagine that they would consider it a free and fair election if Trump's name is taken off a single state.
Those people, a lot of people last time don't think it was a free and fair election, and he was on the ballot. Imagine this time if they remove him. I mean,
especially if Trump's name's off in Florida, he can't win.
No.
especially prior to a conviction, right? Like he's essentially being found guilty before a conviction. And I also think that's why they're trying to push these things forward. Is they're not just looking at
not convinced he's gonna
gagging
get
him or the
convicted.
political consequences of it. They're
That's what
looking
I
at
think.
trying to convict him so that he doesn't even qualify to run for president.
But criminal conviction doesn't matter because the lawsuit citing the 14th Amendment is a civil matter. It's a political matter. So the question is, does a judge think Trump waged insurrection? We're not here to, the judge is going to say the question laid before the court is not whether or not Trump committed a crime, but whether or not he waged insurrection. Based on the evidence from the January 6th committee, media report,
Right.
video, it seems clear the judge just says yes. That's it. And then it'll get appealed.
They could.
Here's the crazy part. Let's just say it's December 12th and it finally goes to the Supreme Court. It's rapidly pushed through and they say, we reject this. You cannot remove Trump's name from the ballot. Well, the election was a month ago.
Right.
Have a
Yeah,
nice
that's
day.
a concern.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, because, and I'm sure you've seen it, the stories out from the Atlantic, New York Times, NPR, whoever else, saying that Trump should be off the ballot, that they should use this 14th Amendment. And then I was listening to a podcast, like an NPR podcast, because I'm always interested to hear
What they say.
and I'll be
Yeah.
like, that's not what happened. But I'm always interested to hear it. And they were saying that secretaries of state for each state and attorneys general, they could make the decision themselves that Trump was guilty of an insurrection and pull his name off the ballot. And they were
Right.
sort of encouraging people to do that. I will say, though, that for the New Hampshire thing, the New Hampshire GOP chair was on Charlie Kirk today and was saying that he talked with the Secretary of State and Attorney General and doesn't think the move against Trump on the ballot is going to happen. But that doesn't
Well, that's good. At least the New Hampshire chair, if he's saying that, it's probably not going to happen. Yeah, they're going to push for it, though. It's going to be really interesting.
mean that it couldn't happen in other states. And certainly a lot of Democrats
California.
are saying that attorneys general have the power to do that. What I don't understand is
So just
why
wait,
states...
unilaterally?
What?
The attorney general can unilaterally just say we take Trump off?
That's what they were saying on this
Wow.
podcast I was listening to today, was that that the attorneys general could say he's guilty of an insurrection, that could then be appealed. But by that point, like you were saying, if he's already off the ballot, then the election interference has already
done.
happened.
Right. It's already happened.
You have to then encourage a
And-
pencil campaign, which I'm totally bringing a
Well,
pencil to the,
it won't work. I mean, it's going to be an October surprise.
right. Something's going to
because
happen.
They want the legal challenge to go through after the election.
After the election, yeah.
That's
when it's
right.
too
They
late,
do it in
yeah.
October. Early voting and mail-in voting is happening, and there's no name, there's no Trump on some of these ballots. And you know what? It's entirely possible, based on what we saw in 2020, with the executive unilateral changes to the election rules and things like that. Things like in Pennsylvania, where they did universal mail-in voting in violation of their own constitution. A lower court judge said, "Yep." Then the Supreme Court
crazy.
goes, "Nah, it's probably fine." Even though any reasonable person can be like, "Yeah, your constitution says you can't do this," but
But
they don't
did
care.
it anyway.
They're going to do whatever they want. I wouldn't be surprised if come October, they just, as
That's
you
just
mentioned,
really interesting with laws if no one enforces them. What's that one law where it was in Michigan, actually? I think it was every person that when they get let out of jail gets a horse in like a month's rations or something. It's like one of those old laws in America that no one actually cares about. America's laws are so bloated. It's insane. That's a thing with local, state, and federal. It's kind of cool, but wow, there's so many laws.
attorneys general just take Trump's name off and say, there is no question. Everyone knows he waged insurrection. We've been talking about it for years.
Using
Uh-huh.
that exact.
So I was saying earlier, they just like set it up for this. They knew people were going to be there on the 6th, January 6th. And then, yeah, they're just like, okay, we're going to use this against them.
word
Yes.
insurrection. Yeah.
And
And
then,
you have to use that word.
right,
Yeah.
because they've been saying insurrection specifically because of the
14th
Constitution.
Amendment. Yeah.
And then what happens is they say, if you have a problem with it, sue me. And everyone does. And then the election's over. And they say, what's the big deal? We had an election.
It's like with COVID, when in New York State, Governor Cuomo shut down all the churches, and a suit was brought, and it ended up getting an emergency hearing before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't shut down the churches. But that was months and months and
Yeah,
months later. And by that point, like, most of
Well-
the people had stopped going to church altogether.
And Cuomo said, okay, we'll get rid of it. And then he did another one in a slightly different way that did the same thing.
Oh, wow.
Because
That
they
it could then
Sue
be
me
challenged again, and months later be ruled to yeah.
Look,
People
you know,
And
are
I don't think they
evil.
brought a challenge
I
at
got
that
it.
point. I think they were out of cash.
I got to tell you,
I don't know.
when
That was
people start to realize that the courts have no enforcement power Everything's going to start breaking down because it's an interesting thing, right? The executive branch has its enforcement power. The the legislative branch has subpoena power, and they can make criminal referrals. It's a bit weaker. The executive branch is obviously where most of the power is, almost all of it. But the courts, what can they do other than bang the gavel and say, do it? And of course, courts have some degree of enforcement, but it's minimal.
I guess like that's how the legislature is too, right? If the Congress, if they go and say, hey, you have to do this and no one enforces it, it's really weird how the country works, really, because if the executive branch goes rogue, they can just do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
If a court says something and no one abides by it, what do? I tell this people when it comes to private matters too. Like, it's the old saying, a person can be judgment proof, or you can't get blood, you can't squeeze blood from a turnip. I'm like, if you win a suit against someone, like look at Alex Jones, right? They sue him for, what is it, like the entire GDP of France? Like, no, that's what they requested. I think they won like $1 billion. I'm like, you're not going to get a penny out of him because you get in line behind all of his other creditors.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't just make these things happen. There's no guarantees.
Yeah, you just have the money.
Also, they're ensuring that he stays on the air because he's going to need to stay on the air in order to earn money to pay them back.
Oh, that's funny too.
Point.
Yeah, unless, I think they said they want to destroy him. But here's my concern. This is what I was thinking about over this past week. We saw the Chaz, the CHOP, the George Floyd autonomous zone. We saw the Atlanta autonomous zone. These things popped up. We saw random acts of violence. And now you have, on top of the political violence, a story we'll get to in a minute, a GOP lawyer, we don't know what happened, was killed in his home. He was stabbed to death. Maybe
Crazy.
Political, maybe not, but we'll talk about that. But with the escalation of political violence that we've been seeing, to the point where Stephen Marsh, who wrote the book The Next Civil War, says we're in civil strife, I had a lingering thought about these autonomous zones. It's funny to me that, so I was trending earlier on Twitter because, I guess.
In your own category, right?
And in my own category, too.
Yes, the Tim Pool category.
Yeah, that's right. Tim Pool was trending Tim Pool. And it was people were talking about Civil War. It's like, oh, I said it to drink. And I'm like, it's really interesting. Honest question. If I were to tell you that, say, like a president claimed the election was completely fraudulent, large amounts of his supporters were claiming that he's the true president and Biden's illegitimate. There had been a dispute over who actually won the election in the previous election cycle as well. And then you ended up with a bunch of people storming into the Capitol and fighting with police in front. You also had a roving band of 100 plus far left extremists storm onto government property in Georgia. And in one instance, get into a shootout with police, shooting a cop, and then the cops shoot back, killing one of the extremists. You have far left extremists being arrested and charged overtly with domestic terror. I'm like, at what point do you say, maybe, yeah, civil war, right? My point is this. All of that stuff, it's almost like you got to keep reminding people that, hey, this stuff happened. I don't know where it goes from here, but yeah, far left extremists took over a government site in Georgia and opened fire on police. After torching several homes in the area, the police came in and returned fire. A cop was struck and one of the extremists was killed. Like, yo, it's getting crazy, all right?
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Now imagine this
Wild.
scenario. This is what got me worried. Chaz and the George Floyd Autonomous Zone were on public property. The Atlanta Autonomous Zone was on a Wendy's, but the Wendy's was burnt to the ground. And then everyone kind of abandoned the area.
Wow.
So we have this,
I remember that.
these different circumstances. What happens if far left extremists occupy a piece of private land? Let's say in Georgia or Tennessee or something. Slightly more conservative leaning area near an urban environment. They occupy to set up their autonomous zone on a derelict piece of private property. The person who owns that property then goes to the police and says, get these whack jobs off my property. And the police say, we have no capability to do that. Like we saw with Chaz and with George Floyd and Atlanta, the police backed down and were like, we're not getting involved. But what happens when a private owner or corporation says, if the police won't do something about it, I will?
Well, you saw there was a guy in Atlanta who was a landlord. He owned a home. He was renting it out. Tenants moved out. A couple days later, he went to check on the home, and he was met with a guy with a shotgun, a bunch of dogs, and some prostitutes. And he was like, oh, why are these people in my house? He was like, you got to get out of my house. The people in the house, the squatters, called the police, said that it was their home.
Yep.
The police got the guy, carted off. It's 6 months later.
Wow.
He's still waiting for the people to get out of his house. He's still paying the mortgage. And he's stuck. He doesn't have a property. He doesn't have any rights, apparently. There was also, the other thing, too, is like it depends on where the government is. Do you remember the MOVE organization in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
And they were bombed, actually, by the city.
Wow.
But this was a group of black nationalists who had taken over a little area in Philadelphia, in West Philadelphia. they had purchased a property in Virginia, and they were planning to move to Virginia, get out of the city. And there was a shooting of an officer, Officer Ramp. I think it was in 79. And a bunch of people, like 9 people, ended up getting arrested and put in prison for that. They were called the Move 9. And so they decided to stay. And by staying, what ended up happening is the mayor of Philadelphia, who was a black mayor, is it Wilson Good? Am I remembering that correctly? I don't know. Anyway, he coordinated with the FBI and bombed.
They firebombed it.
They firebombed it.
Yeah,
and as people were trying to run out, they shot them.
Yep. It was like Waco at a neighborhood level.
Right.
Yeah. And it was a response to a legitimate issue, but they basically declared war on the neighborhood.
Yep.
And they burned down houses, like not just the Move compound, but they burned down houses in the area as well.
Yep.
You know, that's when the government was more had a stronger monopoly on their violence.
But the government was in control of the violence at that point, and that's not the same now.
Right. And so now my concern is what happens if another Chaz happens, but it happens on like abandoned property. Not even abandoned, derelict is a better way to put it. Like someone owns it and they're like, let's say a corporation. You know, Nordstrom just shut down in San Francisco, which is like a big deal.
That is a big deal.
The mall is still owned, right? I think the building was forfeited by Westfield to the bank. So, okay, let's say a large corporation owns 3 acres of land somewhere, and the far left decides we're going to take it, and no one can stop us. Cops aren't going to go engage in a shootout. No. They're going to ignore it.
Not in an abandoned mall.
Militias probably will, though. Militias are nuts.
Not even abandoned mall. Like, let's imagine it's just like an old warehouse building that's not being used, but it's still on the books for some big corporation or moderately sized corp. Let's say like medium local or like corporation in a city that's got like a few board members and maybe a couple hundred employees. So it's small enough, but big enough. The far left decides we're going to take it because it's not being used. It's got broken windows and graffitied all over. But the people who own it are still keeping track of it. And then what happens when the police are like,
we're not going to do anything.
It's not on city property. We're not going to get involved.
This is why the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense is so important.
Exactly.
Like we see over and over again with Chaz and with Chop, with Uvalde and with Parkland, like when the police have mandated that everyone is vulnerable to violence and that, you know, they're the monopoly on violence, they very often like kind of hang back. And in a way, you almost can't blame them because they also want to get home to their families, but they were holding back parents that were trying to get in there.
Right.
In Uvalde, the guy who actually went in to kill the Uvalde shooter, he was an off-duty Border Patrol agent who ignored their orders not to go in there.
That was the most horrifying story.
It's horrific. And the case you were talking about, the man in Atlanta, he was trespassed.
Right.
He was actually arrested until they realized he was the property owner. It's at some point people need to realize you are your own first responder. All the old cliche stuff our parents said about when seconds count, the police are minutes away. They're minutes away to possibly hold you back as people victimize you. And so we really need to understand just how paramount the right to self-defense is.
It's sort of terrifying. I mean, I have like tried to avoid interactions with police my entire life. Like when I was a kid, at one point there were police in my house, and I was like, I'm not going to repeat this. This is never happening again. You know? But it's like it's very scary when you come into contact with police because they show up and they think everybody is the enemy.
Head on a swivel, You
know,
well,
that's what they do.
I mean, well, think about it this way.
Remember they killed that Australian lady?
There was so you guys saw that video where the
it's killed a lot of people
unjustly. People or whatever have the barricades in is that by Burning Man?
Yeah, it was all the people trying to get to Burning Man.
I'm
and
covering
the
that.
Activists
Here,
were blocking
like
the road.
next.
Well, the cops apparently got a call that someone had a gun. I guess what happened was someone told the police, "You need to get down here and clear this barricade before someone shoots one of these protesters," something like that. Then what happens is the dispatcher says to the police, there's concerns about a potential shooting. We've got protesters.
Yeah.
So then the cops think these protesters have guns. And when the cop rams the barricade and jumps out with his gun, he says, "Where's the gun?" several times. Something like that. I think I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong.
We'll watch it
But
next. That's the next
Think about it from the perspective of a cop. All you know is you got a call from dispatch saying 2 people are fighting inside this house. It's getting ugly. We need someone to come and shut this down. And then you show up and there's a group of people in the house being like, "Get out of our house." And some guy being like, "It's my house." Like, what do they do?
Yeah. The Nevada thing was
typically just
amazing.
say, "Civil matter, have a nice day."
Right, like the Tracy Chapman song. The Nevada thing was absolutely amazing, though, because you had climate activists blocking the road. you had Burning Man people trying to get through the road, and then you had tribal police show up to clear the road. So the climate change people think they're on the side of the tribal police. They think that they're on the same side as them. The Burning Man people think they're on the side of the climate change people, but it turns out they're not. Meanwhile, the tribal police are the ones who get they have all the oppression points. So they're the ones who get to win. And then they show up as a bunch of guys in trucks with guns.
Well,
it was just fascinating to watch.
You did have a bunch of upper middle class white people occupying native land.
Right, and that's one thing they said. You're trespassing on tribal land. It's
That's
one thing the cop said to
hilarious.
these people.
Thanks for watching this clip from.
Yeah, that's really funny. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah, how all that played out, which we'll get to just here in one moment. But yeah, my thoughts about the Florida and New Hampshire push to remove Trump from 2024 ballot. I hope it doesn't happen. Like when in January 6th, because of all the election anomalies, we'll just put it that way. A couple of days ago, I did a video about Vivek Ramaswamy saying that he would have certified the election. Go check that out if you want, my full take on, that whole thing. But yeah, if they get rid of Trump on the ballot, it's just gonna be wild. There's gonna be so many lawsuits. They just let Trump run, and if he wins, he wins. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying Joe Biden should get taken off the ballot, and it was super corrupt, no questions asked. But if the people want to elect him again, and he's old. He can't even do. He can't. If he what's that old saying? He would lose his head if it wasn't attached. He literally would. So I'm not trying to get him off the ballot. If that's what the people want, that's what the people want. And it's just going to create so much chaos if you try to remove him. So why not just go through with it? I guess if it's not convincing enough, he's not that bad, apparently. I don't know. But yeah, so don't remove Trump from the ballot. Let's just go through it. It's going to divide the country even more. But like I was saying earlier in a different segment, they want to divide the country, though. They don't care. They don't care about it. So they're just going to go for it because they know that Trump is most likely going to win. So they don't care. And they don't care if they divide the country. Even better. Like I've seen people on Twitter that when Trump's going to jail, they're like, oh, yeah, go and fight and go raid the prison. People on the right, ha, ha, ha. They just think it's hilarious. So that's what they're pushing for. Like, hey, if we get Trump off the ballot, it's just gonna push people to go crazy. Ha, ha, ha. And then we can use it against them. Yep. They know exactly what they're doing with that type of thing. So that's what they're going to try to do. But I hope people just don't let it happen. It's California and stuff, New York. I don't know. It's weird, though, because there's a lot of red in every state, in the rural areas in New York, California and stuff. So hopefully they appeal and it just doesn't work out for them. And let's have just a normal election and see how it goes. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe for daily news updates, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and share your thoughts on the story in the comments below. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.